a great group of kids, amen? So we are very thankful at Auburn Academy. We have a group this Sabbath here and a group this Sabbath at Port Orchard Seventh-day Adventist Church, and that's where I was actually last Sabbath. So it's great to have our kids out and visiting the congregations here in our community. And our campus ministries program has really grown. More and more kids have joined. I think there's about 27 altogether, somewhere in that number, involved in campus ministries and wanting to go out and be a part of ministry in the greater conference. So it's a real blessing. This text, Romans chapter 12, has spoken to me since I was a very young person. I like how the New International Version reads, "Therefore I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy." And I like it first because it gives us the direction by which the urgency comes. It's from God's mercy. It's from God's patience, God's love, God's kindness to us. So in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. So if you're going to do that, if you're planning on offering your body and serving the Lord, do it from the perspective of God's mercy to you. Therefore, it changes your position on how you feel about other people, how you look at other people, because if God looks at you with mercy, look at other people with mercy also, right? So I just love that text. And of course, a living sacrifice is a unique concept, because in the Bible, Old Testament, sacrifices were killed. But this is a living sacrifice, a sacrifice that can go on and has the choice to either get off the altar or stay on the altar and be used by the Lord. Holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. You know, as a young person growing up, I always thought worship was prayer. It was a good, faithful song. Of course, I grew up in the days in the 80s when Maranatha had all those praise songs coming out. It was a new thing in the Adventist church, you know, something other than the hymnal. This was something slowly received in the Adventist church. But nonetheless, boy, these praise songs really minister to me. I really worshiped with those praise songs. But the scripture here says that worship is your service. Worship is your attitude. Worship is the way in which you work with other people. That's how God is praised. Then when we come and worship Him, we're worshiping Him, acknowledging what He's done with us throughout our life actions. It then gives somewhat of a concerted, I don't know if you want to call it a warning, but a direction. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world. And that is an interesting sentence, because there's lots of stuff you can put into that sentence. Do not conform. What does conform mean? What is conform actually going to be? Is it the way you dress, or is it the way you act, or is it what you like, or what you're entertained by? I mean, what does conform mean to the pattern of this world? What kind of pattern? What is the world putting on us? Are we conforming? Are we conforming too much or not enough? I mean, isn't that a unique concept? That's a hard sentence to really grapple with. And I think that God has to take each one of us where we're at and what we're doing. How are we dealing with that? In the area of conforming to the pattern of this world. The only way I can handle that first phrase is to eat the second phrase. And by eating the second phrase, it helps me understand the first phrase. But be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So by spending time with Jesus in prayer and Bible study with other faith believers, the more I spend time with the Lord and serving Him and seeing Him work in my life, it helps me to see the difference between that and the pattern of this world, so that I can be who Jesus wants me to be. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's beautiful, perfect will is. His good, pleasing, and perfect will. So often we say, well, I have my plans, I have my agenda, I have what I want to do. Well, is it God's plans? Is it God's will? So often when you're growing up, you're asked the question, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to do when you grow up? Now, I guess for every one of us, we have a testimony. Some can articulate our testimony better than others, but every one of us has a testimony. Everyone has a story. I know my father-in-law pretty well. He's sitting right here, Dr. Mitzefeld. I've known him for a few years now. Let's see, about 32. And I've heard many portions of his testimony, and every time we get a long time to talk, I hear more and more of his testimony, how God has led him and guided him. When I was a little guy, and about probably 6 or 7, coming home from Sabbath school, after going to Sabbath school, getting ready to eat with the family, sometimes I don't even remember doing this, but my mother would tell me this, I would call the family together and I would want to preach to them on what I heard or learned in Sabbath school. As a very young man, I wanted to be a pastor. I wanted to be a preacher. I remember thinking, in fact, I remember one time I was sitting in church and the pastor was talking about this Greek word and how excited he was about this Greek word. And I remember looking at my mother, I must have been 8 or 9 years old, and I said, Mama, do I have to be excited about that Greek word if I'm going to be a pastor? No, honey, you don't have to be excited about that Greek word. Well, that's good, because I didn't understand what he was so excited about. Always wanted to be a pastor. I got into high school and went through my freshman year of academy, came home that summer, and I was kind of done with being a Christian. I was ready to live a different kind of life, and started checking out all the music in the 80s and who was the Journey and Air Supply and all these musicians that were out there, and listen to this stuff. And I remember thinking, even during that time, and it was about a 4-month period, I remember thinking, I really don't want to be a Christian anymore, but I really want to be a pastor. Really strange. I remember thinking that. I begged my mother not to send me back to academy. I wanted to go to high school. I'd grown up in a small town. All my friends were in the high school. I had run around with them, in the neighborhood and what have you. Please, I don't want to go to high school. Please don't want to go to academy. Please let me go to high school. So my mother said, I'll give you 2 choices. You can either go back to academy or you can stay home and take home study correspondence. Oh, be at home, hang out with my friends. I'll stay at home. And so I did home study that first semester of my sophomore year, and wouldn't you know it, but the pastor in the church had organized, it just happened that an evangelist was coming to town in our little town of Ketchikan, Alaska, and he was going to do an evangelistic series. He had come up to my parents' house, and he had had dinner there with my parents, and he looked at me, and he had a deep voice. His name was Melashenko, Arnold Melashenko. Hello, young man. Hi there, sir. And of course, at this point, I wasn't wanting to be a Christian. I was kind of thinking that was not where I wanted to go. And, hey, young man, I'm going to be doing a series of meetings. I'd like you to do my sound system for me. You okay with that? Yeah, I can do that. Of course, I knew with the sound system, as a kid, you'd run the sound system and what the like. And so, well, then you just do that, young man. And so every night I made sure I put the bass on his voice, so just get that deep bass. And he'd preach, and I'd sit there in that, it was a little carved out room with a little window that you look out of. And I sat back there and I listened to that old gentleman talk about how much he loved Jesus. How much he's looking forward to going to heaven. What a beautiful day that's going to be. And he'd have these stories. And I sat back there in that booth, night after night after night. By the time that series was done, I wanted to be a Christian. I wanted to live for Jesus. I wanted to make a difference in the world. So after that series, I don't know how many people were baptized. Maybe a few people were baptized. But I'll tell you one thing. I was ready to serve Jesus. And so I came to my parents and I said, I want to go back to the academy. You do? Why is that? Because I want to go back to the academy and I want to minister to the guys in the boys' dorm. That's what I want to do. And so I went back to the academy, and every night I would have a little worship in my room with the guys in my hall every night. For 2 years after that, I'd do that every night. So if you look in the annual 1984 at Auburn Academy, you'll see Jay Coon's picture in the annual. And underneath there it says, what are you going to do? It's going to be, says, minister. I wanted to be a pastor. Now, I go to Walla Walla, and I get my eyes open a little bit. Now I'm in theology class. I'm ready to get polished up and perfect for the Lord, right? And so I start going to theology class, and of course I've been an Adventist all my life, and I've heard good preaching going on with a few evangelists that have come up. I'm ready to get polished and fine-tuned so I can dissect the Word of God like the living sword it needs to be. And then I started hearing about different concepts in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Well, Morris Finden says it like this, and so says it like this, and so. And I'm sitting back scratching my head and saying, what in the world is going on? I thought there was one faith. I thought we all thought the same way. And all of a sudden I'm starting to see all these like diversions. And then I listen to my theology teacher say some things. I'm, what? I've never heard that before. That didn't make sense. Well, what is going on here? Well, by the end of that freshman year of theology, I had pretty much been tarnished, and what I thought was kind of the most beautiful sanctuary of holiness and being an Adventist minister kind of got demoted to, well, this is going to be a little struggle going through this thing. And so I said to myself, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go and take a year off of college, and I'm going to go be a student missionary for a year and try to get my head wrapped around what is theology all about. And start, because I had read the Bible, you learn the memory verses and those kind of things, but I needed to read the Bible. I needed to study the Bible. And so I went with a few of my friends, and we went to a little island in the Pacific called Ponape, Micronesia. And during that year, I taught freshman, sophomore, and senior Bible class. And every day I was digging into the Word of God. I was reading The Great Controversy. I was reading Desire of Ages. I was reading Steps to Christ. I was preparing presentations for young people. I was digging in. I was reading. I was sharing. I was reading. I was going out and doing Bible studies with the community kids and their families. Man, I'm telling you something. Talk about learning the Word of God. Way more than 4 years of college. I learned in that 1 year so much more than I did in 4 years at Walla Walla University. And when I came back to Walla Walla, I knew what I believed. I didn't care who believed anything different. It didn't matter to me anymore. I knew what I believed. So I went to Walla Walla. And just as a little add-on, that was a beautiful add-on, I actually met my wife as a student missionary. Right here. Thank you for showing up to church this morning. And I'm getting to a point here. You've got to follow me. Everyone's got a little testimony here. So I go back to Walla Walla, and what's in my mind now is I want to be a missionary pastor, and I like the idea of aviation, so I'm going to be a minister, missionary, pastor, pilot. Remember, you guys know Roger, he's a pilot. He kind of runs in the family. So I told Debbie, I said, well, your mom and dad gave us this car. It's not worth a lot, but it's a car and it's paid for. I think let's go down to the local bank and let's mortgage the car. Let's get a loan on the car so I can take aviation at Walla Walla. Because Roger's going to teach me for free. He's going to teach me, which was nice. So I finished my theology. I'm finishing my aviation. I want to go overseas. I want to be a missionary. And so I make out my resume. and I make out my resume. Of course, I'm still in college. Make out my resume, and it says, I've worked at summer camp, and I did my mission extension, and I worked at this church and that church. And, you have a little resume at college. And I sent it over to Micronesia, where Debbie and I had met. And there was a little island I had gone to for 1 week to do a special week of prayer. I said, I want to go to that little island. It was called Kosarai. I want to go there. I want to be a missionary at Kosarai. So the president received my resume, and I get a phone call from him. And I had worked for this president as a student missionary several years back now. He said, Jay, I would be honored to have you and Debbie come to Kosarai after you finish your theology degree. I said, well, that's wonderful. We are so excited. He said, yep. He said, now listen, I've got a letter, an official letter that I'm going to send you. And that letter, I need you to sign it and send it back to me. I said, okay. I said, now I need you to know something. This is my senior year of college. I need you to know something. In December, we're going to have interviews with the Alaska president, the Washington president, the Upper Columbia president, the Montana president, the Oregon president, the Idaho president. This union. They're all going to come here and have interviews. Should I go to that interview? Because I already have a job. It's coming to me. Well, Jay, it's a really good thing for you to go to interviews. You just go ahead and go to those interviews. I said, oh okay, we'll do that. And so Debbie and I, we dressed up and we got ready and we went to these interviews. One president after another went to these interviews. And they told us, they said, now listen, on January, something like January 9 or January 12 or some January date, on that date, you are going to get a call from one of us, if you get a call at all. But we will not call you until that day. So, okay, that's fine. And I'm thinking to myself, it doesn't really matter. I got a letter coming. So, we go to those interviews. Have you checked the mail yet? Yeah, I checked the mail. Is it in yet? No, it's not in yet. The weeks go by. We're getting close to the January date. And Debbie and I are praying, and finally we say, Lord, that letter hasn't come to us, and that day may come. They may call, they may not call, but let's accept which one comes first, the letter or the call. And so, at 6 o'clock on that day, the phone rang. I was already up. Of course, at college, you get up early anyway, right? So I was already up, answered the phone, and it was Leonard Jakes, president of the Washington Conference. Any of you remember Leonard Jakes? He was president years ago, back in 1989. And, hello, Jay, this is Leonard Jakes. Good morning. Hi, Leonard Jakes. Good morning. Elder Jakes. I would like to offer you a position of pastoring here in the Washington Conference, if you would consider it. My wife and I would love to come to the Washington Conference. Not only that, but we would like to get you an airplane, and we would like to have you fly out in the San Juan Islands and pastor Oak Harbor and Friday Harbor Church. You gotta be kidding. Wow. I remember the first phone call I got. It was from Sue Lindquist. And I was probably in May. It was probably in May, sometime in May of that final year of college. The phone rang and I answered, hello, this is Jay speaking. Yes, is this, or I said hello or something. She goes, is this Pastor Jay Coon? And I thought, wow, that sounds so strange to hear that. And I paused and I said, yes. Just that concept. Well, we're going to be doing Vacation Bible School this summer, and we wanted to ask you about some things. And I'm sitting there totally in the blind. I have no idea. And, well, what do you think? Yeah, that sounds good. So dear Debbie and I, we went to Oak Harbor, but what's interesting, and this you've got to know this part of the story. 2 weeks before graduation, my senior year, I get a phone call from the Micronesia conference. And they said, "Is this Jay Coon?" I said, "Yeah, this is Jay Coon." They said, "Well, the moving truck is going to be there in a week and a half to pick up all your stuff." I said, "What?" "Yeah, you're coming. This is Jay Coon. You've got a job over here in Micronesia." I said, "Yeah, but I never got the letter." It would be about 10 years later that I would find out why I didn't get the letter. 10 years later, we had a gentleman who became our conference treasurer back in the 90s. And we were all welcomed as pastors, and welcome to the conference, and I sat by him at supper one day at a conference event, and I'm visiting with this young treasurer of the Washington Conference, and he says my name, I say my name, and he goes, Jay Coon. Were you ever going to go to the Micronesia mission? Now, nobody asked me that question. I've never been asked that question before, except that one moment. And I said, "Well, yeah, I actually was." He said, "Jay, I was the treasurer when you were being asked. The president had written you a letter, had given it to me to send you, and had left to go to Andrews University to take a new call, and that letter got buried." That letter got buried. I found that letter much later. "Sorry about that, Jay." And I said, "No problem, because I'm living on God's timetable." Amen? God's purposes. People ask you, "Well, what are you going to do in 10 years?" I'm going to be living for God. I want Him to be in control. I don't know what I'm going to be doing in 10 years. And it frankly doesn't matter that I know, because I am a living sacrifice, pleasing and holy to God. So I always had a deep desire for missions. The Lord let Debbie and I serve out in Oak Harbor for 5 years. I flew for 5 years out on the islands, had a great time. In fact, when we drove over Deception Pass Bridge, which we've all been over, and I went over that Deception Pass Bridge for the first time with my dear wife, we both started crying, "Lord, this is where we get to live? This is the most gorgeous place on earth." And to have an airplane too. I mean, talk about, "Lord, why did you give me the very best place first? This is phenomenal." Of course, the afternoon as you're going through and you're pastoring, "Honey, I'm going to go out this afternoon and just fly around the patch and do some touch and goes." "Oh, okay. What pastor gets to do that?" So I flew quite a bit during those years, and I've got a lot of stories that make my brothers Ricky and Roger very upset, because I should have used better wisdom, but the Lord guided me. They say the two worst pilots are pastors and doctors, because pastors think God is going to help them, and doctors think they are God. So, so you never know. So after 5 years at Oak Harbor, the Lord then directed us through some very, very clear paths to go to Redmond, Washington. And it was in Redmond, Washington, where we had planted church in Redmond. We stayed there 7 years, worked faithfully there. At the end of the 7 years, and I could have stayed there the rest of my life, no problem. Raised my kids, stayed there the rest of my life. But at the end of that 7 years, two things very significantly happened. One very negative and one very positive. Negative, it was a church where the average age of my church board was 27 years old. It was mostly recent graduates of college that were going to Microsoft, working at Genie Lift, working at different areas in the east side. They were coming to the church at Redmond. We were a young, vibrant church. When we had a potluck, 100 people showed up. We just did everything together. everything together. But during that time, one of my young deacons became friends, too close of friends, with his best friend's wife. And there was a swap of sorts, not really a total swap, but the young single deacon and the wife took off together. But the funny thing is, they both loved the church. They wanted to stay with the church. And of course, the husband was, what in the world's going on here? And so decisions were made. It tore my heart apart what happened. But the final analysis is about 30 families left the church, because the church could not sit by and say what you kids are doing is okay. It's not okay. And so it split the church, but it split my heart. I totally was devastated. For the first time in my life, I wanted to quit the pastoral ministry. I never wanted to do it again. In fact, some days I didn't even want to get out of bed. It was during this time that a conference president called me from Colorado. He said, "Hey, Pastor Jay, we hear your good work you're doing up there in Redmond. We're wanting to plant a church in Colorado. We'd like to invite you to come and consider being a pastor down here in Colorado." I said, "Sir, I need you to understand that I'm thinking about leaving the ministry. In fact, to be honest with you, sir, I've been looking at newspapers just to look for a different job to do. I can't stand this work anymore. I'm burned out." He said, "Well, thank you for your honesty." The Washington Conference obviously knew the problems I was having. They said, "Jay, it's time for you to go to a sabbatical. So in June, July, and August, no, it would be July, August, and September, you can go on sabbatical. Just stay long enough for camp meeting. Then you can take off for 3 months. Then we'll put you in a new place. Just hang on. You can get through this." Going along with that negative event that was happening on, here's what God's plan was. And this is what I wanted to share with you guys today. But I had to get this kind of set. One workers' meeting here in the Washington Conference, they said to the pastors, "Listen, pastors, the Quiet Hour," which is a self-supporting ministry at the Seventh Adventist Church, is sponsoring pastors doing missions somewhere in the world, and they'll pay for you to go on a mission if you want to go. Well, I'm thinking, man, I'm having a lot of problems in my church right now. I'd really like to go on a mission. And so I called my father-in-law, who's a doctor. He's sitting here with me today. And I said, "Hey, Dad, you want to go with me on a mission? They're opening up India, and we can go to India on a mission." And so he said, "Sure, I'd take Mom and I with us. We can do some medical stuff, and I'll do an evangelistic series, and we'll go to India." And so Quiet Hour worked that out. The Washington Conference worked that out, and everything was going just fine. We were going to go to India. This was about 1999. We're getting all this ready to go in 2000, somewhere in that framework, and it closed down. It closed down. The city had some kind of a murder issue going on in it, and they closed down the evangelistic series, so we couldn't go. And my father-in-law met a man about that same time who was getting baptized in a local church, and his deepest desire was to share the Seventh-day Adventist message of the soon coming of Jesus with his people in a little city in the northern Philippines called Pagudpud. My dad called me back and said, "Hey, Jay, would you like to go to Pagudpud?" I said, "Where in the world is that?" "Well, it's a teeny little place up in the northern Philippines." And so that's the story I want to share with you today. We formed eventually an organization called In His Service Amianan. But remember, I went to the Philippines, Pagudpud, without ever seeing Auburn Adventist Academy in my mind's eye. Didn't see it at all. In that first year coming back in 2001, there I am, just coming back from Pagudpud with my dear wife, Debbie. Never thinking I would go back again. Did I love it? Oh, did I love it. It was fantastic. We baptized 75 people. We were doing 100 people a day in medical missions. I mean, we were just having a phenomenal time. It was fantastic. We were there 4 weeks, came home, and I came home in March, April, I guess, came home in April, and by the end of May, half of my congregation would be gone out of my church. And I wrote a letter then in May to the congregation. I said, I'm leaving. I do not know where I'm leaving, but I'm leaving. And so the Washington Conference said, yep, we'll support that. And so went to camp meeting. Then I took off, and I just kind of we were a nomad family for 3 months, or two months or so. And I was offered a job at Mount Ellis Academy. Is that right? Yeah, I think it was Mount Ellis Academy in Montana, to be the pastor at that church. And I declined it because I just didn't feel like I had the energy, the emotional energy. I was so burned out with pastoring. And then the Washington Conference said, Jay, we've got a call for you. Would you like to come to Auburn Academy as an assistant pastor and work under Bill Roberts? Bill Roberts was a childhood friend that I met when I was 2 years old. We went to Sabbath school our whole life together. We went to high school together. We went to college together. I was his best man in his wedding. He was one of my groomsmen in my wedding. I named my son after him. He named his son after me. Would I like to work with him? That would be amazing. And so I came to Auburn Academy. And I'm standing before, what Bill and I did is we taught senior Bible, and we were pastoring the Academy Church. And so I'm teaching senior Bible one day, and my father-in-law and I had decided to go back one more time to the Philippines to do a follow-up kind of meeting and that kind of thing. And so I was telling the senior class about my mission I did last year and how excited it was. And I said to the class, and in fact, this next March, I'm going to go again. Later that day, 4 kids came to me. Pastor Jay, can we come talk to you? Yeah. Pastor Jay, can we go with you to the Philippines? I guess so. I'm going to be going on this airline here. If you want to get a ticket, that'd be fine. Oh, okay, that'd be great. They worked it out, and 4 kids came with me. And the rest is history. Over 700 kids I've taken over to Pagudpud on medical mission trips. So I want to share with you a little bit of our story. When we come to the Philippines, we fly into Manila, which is in the southern part of Luzon. And then we fly up or take a bus. If we take a bus, it's about a 10 to 12 hour ride. If we take an airplane, it's 45 minutes. We try to take the airplane. But I've done both many times. Up in the northern part up there. In the north, you can see Lawag and then little Pagudpuds on the very tippy top of that island. Pagudpud, interesting name. There are a lot of little folklores on how that name came about, but it's a name that, let's just say if you use it for a password, no one else will guess it. But it's an oceanside village. Mainly fishing and rice are the industries. Besides, let me tell you, mangoes and dragon fruit. So when we go over in March, we have all the mangoes you can eat every meal we eat. And I'm telling you, the mangoes are just truly, truly heavenly. This is a little bit of the fishing village. So when I went over there in 2001, I took this picture. It was a picture of the Seventh-day Adventist Church that had been destroyed in 1995, which I would later, 15 years later, I would learn of the pastor and know the pastor who actually helped build that church, sort of way. It's so fascinating. I actually took his son over to Pagudpud, and he was at the time a missionary pastor who actually helped build that church. Amazing how the Lord works those things out. But anyway, this church, a typhoon came through and destroyed it, and there was only about 8 to 10 Adventists in the community with no church whatsoever. And so, the people wanted a place to worship together in. So the second year I went, after those 4 kids, I took this group of kids right here. And my youngest daughter, Heather, is right here. And my son is right here, Michael. By the way, it's about 11:30 at night right now with this picture. And then my daughter, Kimberly, is right up here. This young man here, Ryan Wilson, he's now a pastor in the Washington Conference. Just a number of people in this picture, just really a great group of kids. Ben is also working for the church today too. So over the years, you can see just various groups of kids that I've taken over there as they have gotten larger and larger. This is probably my largest group. This is 47 kids that I took over a few years ago, and this was in 2017. This year in March, I have 37 kids that I'm taking over this coming March. That first year, after the 4, so the 2003, this is when we started building our Seventh-day Adventist church. And so the kids would tie rebar and help pour concrete in the holes. And then to see this church come the next year when we came back, there it was. And then we could pour that concrete on the floor, was all poured that year of 2004. And then you can see the church just progressively getting more and more finished. Until there it is today, the Pagudpud Central Seventh-day Adventist Church. And it is a beautiful congregation of people. I've probably baptized well over 300 people in that community. And we have 6 churches, and right now we're building our 7th church over there at the present time. Beside the church, we have what we call the pavilion. And the pavilion upstairs was our rooms. We had to, in order to do this right, we had to get the kids out of hotels and into our own environment. Because every time we went over there, we spent most of our money that we raised on hotel bills. So instead of doing that, we put our money into a pavilion that we could have, and then that pavilion became our home. So the girls on one side, the guys on the other side in bunk bed formats, and then Debbie and I in the middle. On the bottom part is where we had our cafeteria, our place where we ate, and a little clinic to the left, just a small little clinic, probably 8 by 13. Every day we would run these medical mission trip clinics. And so we'd go out into the villages. We set up kind of a little hashtag clinic, and the people would come in. And I'm telling you, you see amazing things there that you would think, wow, this person needs to be in an emergency room. And yet they have no place to go. And they're told if they don't have the money at the hospital they go to, they're told to go home. So Dr. Mitzelfeld saw many, many miracles, and that's a whole afternoon and a couple days right there just listening to that. We always used an interpreter for some of the folks that needed interpreters as we go through it. This is our little clinic that we had in the pavilion. We estimated that we saw well over 1,000 patients in that little clinic over time. The gentleman off to the far left there, Kevin, he's a Korean young man, and today he's practicing medicine in Korea. And I remember filling out a recommendation for him for his medical school he was going to. But it's really neat to see these kids continuing to grow and go on with life. So it was decided then in 2005 to buy property, and we didn't really have a full understanding of what we were going to do with that property until about 2008. And in 2008, we began to build the Pagudpud Adventist Wellness Center. And so I'm going to show you something that took many years in just a few seconds. And each phase of this was a big group of academy kids. So the academy kids come over. They raise 20 well, in those days, they were raising about $2,200. And about $2,200, $1,000 would be for them, their travel, their food, all that. $1,200 would go right into the mission. So that's what we try to do every year, is about $1,200 goes right into the mission. So this year they have to raise $2,600 because it costs more to fly over there and the traveling, all those things, insurance, but then about $1,200 goes back into the mission. So we always then had funding as we would continue to build this thing, and of course individuals who would give. The roof cost us about $20,000, and a gentleman who came over with us one time said, here's $20,000, get the roof on that building. And so that's how that took place. It's 3 stories. 2 stories have windows, and the 3rd story has windows at the very ends, but the 3rd story is apartments basically for living, and the 1st and 2nd story is more for the medical program. So the 1st story, this is kind of in the early days of just kind of finishing up the medical room there, and you can see the examination room. This is a series of pictures of our lobby and how kind of it looked. I'm standing in the exact same place, each one of these pictures. So you can kind of see how it looks today, where the people wait on the chairs there. Just what they're looking at in front of them is actually where the pharmacy is, and then they check in. You can see the desk there, and then we've got the hallway with all the different, we offer urgent care, we offer physical therapy, we offer pediatric care, we offer dentistry, we have digital x-ray, we have pharmacy, and we have laboratory. And laboratory is so essential, right? Because a doctor needs to do a lab to know what's going on with the patient. So that's our campus there, and we're seeing, get this now, over 1,200 patients a month. Praise God. Praise God. Had I not gone to Auburn Adventist Academy at that moment in my life, and those 4 kids hadn't come to me and said, hey, Pastor Jay, can we go with you? That would not be a reality. But the Lord saw fit, because you see, the Lord has a will. The Lord has a way. Our job is to stay as His living sacrifice. And then as He presents paths for us to follow, we follow in that way. I have a picture here because I want to show you this house is about 2 blocks from the church. This is a very common house. In fact, one of our members lives in this house, and there's Dr. Mitzelfelt with Gilbert, one of our members. And so it's a very impoverished area. But when they come to the clinic, the Adventist clinic, it's like stepping into an American clinic. It's clean, it's air conditioned, and service is at a cost that if you can't afford it, you will get service anyway. And part of what we do with the mission trips is we give money from the mission trip back into Pagudput Adventist Wellness Center to pay for those people who are indigent and cannot pay for their care. So it's very, very important that we're a mission clinic. Here's another house. What's funny about this house is that tent that is over it, that green tent, is actually a green tent that was used here at camp meeting in the Washington Conference with the early teen tent for probably 30 years. And that tent, we had to get rid of that tent at the Washington Conference, had to get rid of it because it wasn't fireproof. And so a group from Cedar Home Church called me one day and says, Pastor Jay, I know you're doing a mission in the Philippines. Can we send that tent over? And so they used that tent to do 3 evangelistic series in that tent. And then as it started tearing and such, so they started parsing out to different people. Everywhere I go in Pagudput, I see pieces of that big tent on people's houses. Isn't that amazing? It's the funniest thing. So this is our staff. This was actually taken a number of years ago, but the gentleman on the far left, he is our medical administrator. He is internal medicine board certified, as well as a master's degree in hospital administration. And he basically is the one who is running our program. And we just have a phenomenal staff of people. So what happens is, in March, I bring the kids over, okay? In September, which is just a few months ago, I take college kids over there. And those college kids, I do an orientation for them, and they stay for 8 months. And they work in the medical clinic. So last year I had 12 kids. This year I have 6 kids. Kids are from Loma Linda, from Andrews, Walla Walla, Union, Southern, all over the United States. I've had every college represented. And then during the summertime, which, what church is it that David and Gail go to? It's Cedar Home? Yeah, Cedar Home. Yeah, Cedar Home Church is one of them, but during the summertime, we do 2-week trips with different groups around the United States. So Cedar Home Church is actually going to do a 2-week trip in April of this next year. So they're coming over right after the Academy kids leave in March. Any of you want to jump on board with the Cedar Home Church, just contact them. But what we're doing is we're allowing people in the Washington Conference to be, or really with the North America Division, to be involved in a turnkey medical mission trip where you're connected with a people, you're going into their homes, you're ministering, and you're seeing firsthand mission work take place. It is phenomenal. This is our dental clinic that we have. And our emergency clinic that is now with our beds. Those beds are probably $10,000, $12,000 beds. I picked those up for $300 on Craigslist in Portland, Oregon. I got 3 of them. And we shipped them over. And we just shipped, 3 weeks ago, we just shipped 8 more of those beds over. And we got those not for $300, but for $0. We were given them. We were able to ship over in a container, a 40-foot container, which is going to be really fun because the kids, when they go over in March, are going to help me sort through it. About $120,000 worth of material from hospitals that they got rid of stuff as they upgrade to the latest and the greatest. So it's really going to advance our program a lot. We had a doctor recently who came over. And it was so funny. He came over, he got there on a Monday and was excited to practice and help out. He's an orthopedic surgeon and he has all these skills. And Tuesday morning, lights out. No power. What's going on here? Well, we get power outages. Well, how can you practice medicine with power outages? Well, it's just what we have to do. Why don't you have a generator? Can't afford it. When he finished that trip, he basically handed us $100,000 and said, get yourself a transformer, get yourself a generator, get yourself a lab machine. You guys, if you're going to say you're a hospital clinic, you need to have the material. What's really cool about that is that it's not, this gentleman is not a practicing Seventh-day Adventist. He's my brother-in-law. And he's fascinated with what we're doing. And we really feel like this is one mission that's actually starting to reach his heart and wanting him to be more involved in what God is doing as he sees the miracles take place. The place is beautiful. Not only is this beach beautiful, but look at how populated it is. I tell people all the time, I say, this is Waikiki 200 years ago. That's looking the other direction, just so that you can see all the people. It is one of the most gorgeous places. In fact, they call it one of the secrets of the northern Philippines. Unfortunately, Sands Resort is right now building a huge hotel. One of these hotels that can have both sides and a big water feature thing all the way in the middle, about 30 miles north of Pagudpud. And so more and more people are going to come up there in that area. Last year, this was my missionaries from various colleges that came and spent a whole year there. One of these girls just wrote a blog about her time in Pagudpud, and it was the most moving talking about how she finally experienced what it's like to have a relationship with Jesus. Beautiful, beautiful. And this is my group this year over there in the Philippines. Beautiful group of kids. Where are we at? Well, we don't know. Because we're still waiting to see what the next door God has to open. But I'll tell you right now what it looks like. At least there's a knock on the door. For the last 2 years, we could see our projections getting to the point where we're going to be too small for the community. We knew we're going to someday need to build a hospital where we could have a surgical ward, where we could have things that people need in this northern area. And so for about 1.5 to 2 years, we've been looking for another piece of property. A piece big enough to house a hospital, because this place here is probably only 1/2 acre of property. Maybe about 1/2 acre, 3/4 an acre. So in our search for a property, we finally found one. We called up an Adventist engineer from Manila who's built 2 hospitals in the Philippines. We said, could you come up here and look at this piece of property? So he came up and he looked and he sat down with it and he says, let me tell you all the negatives for buying in Philippines. And he went over all the negatives. And I'm telling you, there are a lot of negatives. One of them, interestingly, if a piece of property has been in your family for three generations, you can never sell it. You can act like you're selling it. But if someone else in your family contests it, they can take it right back. So there's a lot of research you have to do on every single piece of property. So he said, your piece of property you're looking at, you have to do a geoscience study, you have to do a land study. There's a lot of things you have to do. So we said, okay, well, we'll get started on that. So we told the owners we're interested, and the owners live in Hawaii. And so they said, yep, let's get this place property sold. It's about, I'm trying to remember how many, is it about 8 acres? 5, yeah, 5, so yeah, about 14, it's about 14 acres of property. On the main road that goes up, that furnishes other cities along the way. So we looked at the property, we found the property, we liked the property, the studies are, everything's clicking off, check, 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 check. Now, this engineer comes to us last year. Well, yeah, just actually this year, the first part of this year. Hey, I need to tell you guys something. I was at a meeting in Korea for engineers. Well, this guy's an engineer in the Asia market, and so he goes to these different, conventions. I was sitting at a table with some friends that I've made over the last 5 years of Korean engineers. And as we were talking, the Koreans were telling me how they build hospitals, or they finance, I should say it like that. They finance hospitals in third world countries every 4 to 5 years. Then they turned to me and they said, we would like to build or finance up to $6 million a hospital in the Philippines. Do you know where we might do something like that? And the engineer said, I know the place, I know the land, and I know the people that will do it. So right now we're in negotiating of that property and putting down a down payment for that property. And we're hoping that within the next 3 to 5 years we'll have a full, large Adventist hospital in the northern Philippines. Therefore, I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice.